And welcome. We are back in 303 and we are dealing now with Craig Conrad's Unstoppable Volume Lesson 2-3, An Act of God. You will maybe recall in the previous lesson that our chapter ended with Craig Conrad having a firearm pointed right in his face. Maybe you'll recall. This is the follow-up chapter. Let's write down in our journals really quickly this observation for a focus, please. That the challenge is we have to understand what matters most to us in our life. Sometimes near-death experiences can actually lead us to that knowledge or that realization. Let's read along now with Mr. Conrad, Lesson 23. There's not a whole lot of time to think when someone has a loaded gun pointed at your head, especially once they pull back the hammer. Now's not the time for talking. It's time to react. It all comes down to the most basic of animal instincts, fight or flight. Had Vicky and Colton been there, his wife and son, the only choice would have been to fight. Luckily, she was still inside changing his diaper, so I chose the other option, flight. I ran away while zigzagging, so I'd be harder to hit. My shoulder blades nearly touched with tension in anticipation of being shot. As I was running, I had a weird thought. I'll feel the bullet before I hear the gunshot. I zigzagged until I got clear across 8th Street. He'd have to be a good shot to hit me from here, I thought, as I turned around to see where George was. He was headed back inside his apartment. To this day, I don't know if the gun jammed or if he decided not to shoot. I ran in the front door of my house, Vicky and Colton on the floor in the middle of changing his diaper. I yelled to her, "George just tried to shoot me," as I ran upstairs to load my double-barrel shotgun. "What should I do?" "Call the police," Vicky calmly replied. Only after I loaded my gun did I call 911. I had the phone in one hand, a loaded 12-gauge shotgun in the other. The police were on their way when the phone rang. It was George. "Let's call a truce," he said. My scared and sarcastic response was truce, peace, love, whatever. "What the heck did I do that caused you to try to shoot me?" I yelled into the phone. "You've been bugging my phone and reading my mail by sneaking into my apartment," he claimed. "I don't even have a key to your place," I screamed back. My heart was pounding, my mind was racing. Suddenly I got very calm. "I have an idea, George. Suppose I call the cops and have them check the lock and dust for fingerprints. We'll see if we can catch whoever it is that's getting into your apartment." "Good idea," he said, as he slammed the phone down. The police would later give credit to that quick thinking for preventing a shootout with George. When they arrived, he thought they were coming to dust for fingerprints. Instead, they arrested him. His loaded gun lay on the table next to the door. As the police handcuffed and escorted George to the police station, a terrifying realization set in. What's next? Obviously, George would figure out I tricked him when I called the police. This would totally convince him that I was the boogeyman. I knew what the police would do. George was 72 years old, a slap on the wrist, maybe a night in jail. Then Psycho George would be coming home. We had to go to the police station to make a statement. I told Vicky that once we got home to go ahead and take Colton and leave for a week, month, or a year. I was sure that the problem with George would escalate to a shootout. I didn't want them to be innocent victims. On the way to the police station, I prayed harder than I ever had. I needed help. We could see George through the mirrored glass as we entered the police station. He couldn't see us. They were beginning their interrogation. We were led to the statement room. Suddenly, the officers who were with George started screaming for the officer who was with us. Our officer ran to the room that George was in. Police cars were pulling up to the police station with their lights and sirens on. Next came the ambulance. Police and paramedics were frantically scrambling and yelling in a state of confusion. I thought George freaked out, grabbed an officer's gun, and shot someone. My wife was hiding in the bathroom with Colton in her arms, and I was guarding the doorway. He'd have to kill me first. For almost half an hour, I stood guard, not knowing what was going on. When the door slowly opened, an officer was standing there, white as a ghost. "Did this guy ever have any health problems?" he asked. "What the heck is going on?" I exclaimed. "George dropped over," he told us. "The ambulance just rushed him to the hospital." An hour later, he was officially pronounced dead. The coroner's report said he died of a heart attack. I went to the hospital. I didn't believe it, and I had to see it for myself. Besides, after all those psycho movies I'd seen, it didn't matter how many times they got killed. They always came back to life. The head nurse put her hand on my shoulder sympathetically. He was too old. It was too big of a heart attack, and we couldn't revive him, she said. Since I couldn't think of a politically correct way to say it, I replied, George tried to kill me today. I came over to see if he was really dead. Yes, he is. He's at the mortuary, she informed me. I went home and called the mortuary. Yes, he's really dead, the mortician said. 2 days later, I was raking leaves in front of George's apartment. When I looked down the street, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was George's car coming right toward me. I threw my rake in the air and ran in the house. Completely out of breath, I said to my wife, Crazy George is back. His car's headed this way. She could see the fear in my eyes, but that didn't stop her from laughing as she said, his friend came by earlier today to pick up his car. Looking back, I believe George wanted to go to jail. He would have had someone to look after him, had free room and board, his meals provided, and all his medical problems taken care of. The friend that took his car confirmed this. Because George was drunk and had lost it, you would have gotten shot just because you were there, he said. George could have taken a lot of things from me that day, all of my dreams, goals, and plans for the future. I've often wondered what life would have been like for my wife and son had the gun fired that day. I would have become stoppable, and alcohol definitely would have played a major role in that. I'm relieved to say that the day I zigzagged, I was unstoppable, and this saved me. Otherwise, I could have ended up a victim, just like crabs in a bucket. Let's pause for a moment and jot down a few notes here about the lesson 23. The first thing we'll say, write it in your journals really quickly, is sometimes, as we've already said it once, sometimes a near-death experience helps to teach us what matters most in our lives. Sometimes a near-death experience can kind of bring that to focus. Let's also point out number 2. Obviously, this is one of the clear messages of the Unstoppable program. Drugs and alcohol will ruin those things most sacred in your life. It's just a matter of time. And of course, in our story here, it's also clear, can also ruin things most sacred in other people's lives as well. Any of us that have struggled, for example, with friends, family members who struggle with drugs and alcohol will report that it doesn't just affect them. It affects everyone in the family and then even beyond. Finally, number 3, an interesting question. When was one time in your life when you learned really what was most important to you? You'll maybe remember that the great American writer Henry David Thoreau said when he left to go and spend his 2 years at Walden, I went to the woods, he says, because I wish to live deliberately. That is to say, to find out what most matters, what's essential for a person's life. What is it that you really have to have in your life to make you happy? This is an interesting question and clearly one that we want to engage in with Lesson 23 of Unstoppable. Thank you.